Hey everyone, Roman here. Hope you're having a great week. Before we get into today's video, I just want to send a reminder to check out Brian's reveal of his Crazy Taxi build. It is incredible what he's been able to do with this Ford Galaxy. And also contained in that video is the announcement and all the details about this weekend's RCR car meet at the Greater Philadelphia Expo Center in Oaks, Pennsylvania. You can get all the details here. The link is in the description. Also, check out my complete history of the Corvette video over on our second channel. It is a compilation of all of my history of Corvette videos into one epic 3-hour video that's been edited so that it all runs together as one story. But for now, let's get into the video because it's a long one. And thank you for watching, seriously. The year is 2004. Scrabble is inducted into the National Toy Hall of Fame. Facebook and Gmail are created. And, well, Ford and Mazda were knee-deep in the ongoing cycle of this first generation of an SUV that they refuse to call a crossover. Something that could compete with the Hondas and the Toyotas and the Jeeps of the world. So you can go on family road trips to the middle of beautiful, scenic nowhere and not have to worry that the kids are going to use the car as a Wi-Fi hotspot to ignore you. But is the Ford Escape the sport utility vehicle that puts the utility in the phrase? Or is it just another attempt at creating something that is like the Ford Bronco? Hey, you remember the Bronco? It's like the Bronco, but it's worse! Allegedly. Well, member berries are back in season, so let's go back to 2004 with the off-roader that's off its rocker. This is a 2004 Ford Escape, and this is... what was I going to call it? Oh, Race to the Bottom, formerly Hate Hunt. I didn't write a song to do the intro to the show. Oh, okay. I told myself I was going to keep an open mind, all right? I told myself I was going to be fair to this car. I told myself that just because I'm looking for the worst car and was offered a car to review on the premise of it being bad didn't mean I was actually under any obligation to dump on it. But I'll be honest. There was some soul-searching happening here because I found that the old biases came back. And I think it's tied into the resentment I have for my Mustang. I mean, I love her to death, but I also resent her Fordness and how often things go wrong, how much it costs to keep her on the road, and how it cuts into my ability to save for something else so I can combine savings with whatever I sell her for and get myself into something less stressful, you know? And I think that creeped into my preconceived notions regarding the Ford Escape. I mean, if I took a shot for every time I went into a Ford with low expectations and still found myself sort of shrugging with my entire body, I'd need my stomach pumped. This car is an existential crisis because it doesn't entirely know what it is. It doesn't know what it's for any better than I know what I'm for. Is it an SUV? Is it a crossover? Is it an off-roader? Is there anything this does that couldn't be had cheaper in a Taurus wagon? Because it's kind of a lateral move, right? Like, why do this to yourself? Because you see, the first generation Ford Escape is one of the most boring cars on the face of this earth. White rice exterior, dry baked potato interior. It's just starchy. Racked with the constipated face of impending doom. The automotive equivalent of the face you make when you realize you left the oven on. Yeah, misery loves company, but sometimes misery throws a rager. Because that's really the best explanation I have for this thing selling as well as it did. People just sort of like uncomplicated things, because the more vanilla something is, the easier it can be to imprint yourself onto it. Or to just leave it completely untethered from any identity whatsoever because you don't view a car as a rolling billboard for your personality or your income level. But even then, you would anticipate that there are better options, Toyota Corolla, for people who want something dry, Toyota Corolla, and simplistic Toyota Corolla. However, I guess we should make allowances for people who want something bigger than a sedan that still sort of handles like one. The Ford Escape was positioned below the Ford Explorer and came with a base 2-liter 4-cylinder making 130 horsepower and 135 pound-feet of torque with a 5-speed manual transmission. But this is the 2004 XLS model, so you're getting the 3-liter Duratec V6 with 201 horsepower at 5,900 RPM, and 196 pound-feet of torque at 4,700 RPM, matched to a 4-speed automatic transmission. Kind of basic, right? But the simplicity of the Escape's function hides a more complicated arrangement under the hood. I mean, it's like an open marriage down there. And I guess I'll throw to Brian for this part because he can speak about these things a lot more intelligently than I can.
V6, double overhead cam, 24 valve. This is the Duratec. Durable. I'm a service top sideways. I'm gonna spill my oil all over you. And you can lick my battery crust as your dad watches Lou Dobbs from the other room. The only thing that gets me horny anymore is the McLaughlin Group.
That's all the higher it goes. Like they don't give you a. No, it's not like Honda. They don't give you a service spot. You got to only have it that high. That way you hit your head on it. Really, there's nothing down here where it should be. Well, if you're in a shop, that means you have to have your ski pole or some sort of extendable thing to hold the hood. At least the hood goes up that high. Rod, are you a good boy? Is this clean? I didn't ask if I can. And I'm sorry, I didn't ask if I could. Yeah, it's clean. Okay, continue reviewing the car as I correctly put your air cleaner back in here.
But this is more interesting than me reviewing the car.
Just get it in there.
I like how the latch that's closer to the battery is more corroded. I would have just myself. I thought it was real. It wasn't. Ford build quality. Awesome. Got the rust coming up on the sides. You got the doors that... Actually, that's all right. Oh, it smells like an old Cessna in here. Smells like BO with the windows up and the fan off.
Smells like baseball.
I actually do have to use the bathroom.
Looking at this, I can understand why it has a certain measure of popularity in the used car market. There's something very cheap and accessible about this because realistically, you want a car that will be capable of being beaten on relentlessly, but for not a whole lot of money. I can see why this is appealing because... But then also it's like very complex for no reason, right? Yeah. Like, why are you putting everything where, like, okay, my Mustang, right? The alternator's just like right here. You just lift it up and it, like, the battery's back further, but still, like, you can just change the alternator yourself in 15 minutes. Yeah. This, you gotta move heaven and earth. It's like, you know, the Egyptians had an easier time building the fucking pyramids than getting to this alternator back here.
This friggin' wide V6 in an engine bay that's made for a 4-banger. I mean, your Mustang is a longitudinal engine, so it doesn't matter what type of V6 it is, you have plenty of room to work. But this is like the top tier engine that you would put in the Tauruses at the time. And this is the engine you want in a Taurus, but the Tauruses have longer hoods. There's more room for a transverse V6 in there. It's like a Honda Accord that has a J-Series V6, great V6. Whereas this, it's a RAV4 that costs 1/3 of the price and has 1/3 the quality. I mean, this is a case, like the kind things that I can say about the Escape. I recognize that they're a popular product by Ford. I don't like this car. I look at it as wasteful. It's like the Pinto. It's the Pinto of the 2000s. Everybody had one because they're cheap. Yes, it has 4-wheel drive. Yes, it's going to be better in the snow than a front-wheel drive Corolla. all things being equal, running the same tires, this will be better. This all-wheel drive / four-wheel drive or selective. It's all-wheel drive. I don't know what the it's doing with a switch that says four-wheel drive. It's an all-wheel drive system that I guess you can permanently, it defaults probably to front-wheel drive. Yeah. It's fine until the warranty runs out. And if you know how to work on it, great. But you have to know what you're getting into with a car that was built specifically to a budget.
Well, let's do a little bit of retail prices right. What do you think the original MSRP for this was in 2004, if you had to guess?
Okay. Are we doing prices right rules I can't go over?
Can't go over.
We're like the V6. We're talking about the V6 model.
And without options.
V6 model, base options at whatever the V6 comes with. I'm going to aim I want to aim high. I'm going to give a price, and it's because I think they were trying to sell the V6s at a premium. $18,000.
Pretty close. $21,990.
Oh, they made their money. Good for them.
Yeah, and according to the dealer sticker, it's an extra $1,000 for the options. So that brings it up to a nice 22, bordering on 23. I'm sure I'll put the price here adjusted for inflation, but yeah, this was kind of like what the appeal is, I guess. I mean, I remember Motor Week having like a very glowing review of this first generation.
Dumb.
Yeah, which I don't really get, because it's like,
well, I get it now, because we're seeing that these cars did not hold up to user neglect. I mean, obviously this thing got here, so it's been taken care of by a good person, just like every single Jeep just gets coal shovels worth of money thrown into them. But I've seen what happens to these cars when they're not taken care of. They do not hold up to rust, especially like East Coast rust. There's not a whole lot of metal down here. Some of the transmissions break. You have oil problems around valve cover gaskets. You have oil consumption issues. And you have general fit and finish, CV axles, rear diff. I mean, I see simple things in here like the brake master cylinder, brake booster. That's fine. I gotta go throw this away.
go for it. Okay, look, there are plenty of problems I could go into. And for one, when you buy an Escape around here, which I mean, you know, the East Coast, generally the Northeast, you're pretty much at the mercy of the CD4E transmission and the scattershot whims of the Pennsylvania motorist. Half responsible and half lost in an imagined argument over a slight that never happened. Just aimless turnpike aggression from middle management types threatened by other people's happiness. You find yourself on endless baked macadam, where a live deer is far rarer than their carcasses, on the margins of the road like details in a notepad on its last page. Roads with the pock-marked face of a lifelong acne sufferer, long stretches with the hockey puck turds of carriage-drawing horses who can't speak, but in whose eyes can be read a withering resentment. Because don't go thinking for 1 second that horses actually like us. I don't care what you think you know from your horse girl fiancé or from playing The Witcher 3. I know if I were a horse, I would be resentful of having to pull a carriage past Shady Maple Smorgasbord every day without being allowed inside. Wait, where was I? Okay, so the CD4E 4-speed automatic was known for problems in its day, like worn wheel hub bushings and issues with shift lever bolts. In fact, it got so bad that Ford recalled all 2001 to 2008 Ford Escapes that had the remanufactured CD4E due to the problems with the aforementioned shift lever bolts, which weren't fastened properly. The end result was the driver being unable to control the gear they're in once the shift lever disengages the transmission. So you think you're in drive, but you're really in reverse, or you think you're in park when you're still in drive. This is more or less what happened with Bobby here, as this was the primary reason the transmission in this car got replaced, since it wouldn't move while in drive and he had to limp this to the shop in second. And this is among other repairs, like pressed-in wheel bearings, new brake hoses, basically most of the exhaust. and he had to deal with the accumulation of rust in the rear wheel well, in addition to a spark plug coming out of the block, and the strip holding the gas tank rusting through so that the tank was more or less sitting on the axle while he was filling up. You know, Brian comparing this to a Pinto doesn't seem too far off when you think of what a potential fire hazard this thing could be.
What is being run off the intake cam? What is this? I see a belt and a belt tensioner. This guy. That goes... All right, you got your main belts there, which I understand. Now, what the heck is this? Where is the alternator?
Way down there.
Whoa, holy moly. Oh, that is way in the back. You'd have to...
Take the tire.
Yeah. You'd have to take the tire off, maybe take one of the engine mounts off, just change your alternator. Holy
Jack
moly.
off the engine, but
Oh, you had to change the alternator?
I had it rebuilt, so
Well, I know they're all
it was
reman now.
it was
but-
cheaper just to get them to replace the one part.
All right, that looks like your AC compressor way down on the bottom. What I'm looking for is a water pump, which might be that. Might be that. I see
that is a water pump. I'm not 100%.
I see power steering. So maybe that's your power steering pulley that goes right there. Does that make this little rinky-dink pulley down here being run off the intake cam, is that the water pump? This little... No, oh my God, that is. No way, that can't be a water pump. But I don't see any... All right, there's your rad line. If that's the water pump, that's like a squirt gun you buy from Five Below.
Got the Haynes manual if that helps too.
Yeah, that certainly looks like a tiny little water pump if you see the size of the guy's hand. Yeah, it doesn't say like remove the pulley from the top of the intake cam. Freaking Ford. All of this to have a more powerful engine. Now granted, I like the Duratec. It's way better than the Essex engine. But the packaging here to throw it in the Escape, this is a lot. You are fighting for every inch.
Ford also issued a recall on Escapes from 2001 to 2004 for Canada and the northern Salt Belt states in the US due to, big shock, subframe rust that can lead to broken lower control arm mounts, which could then detach from the subframe entirely. Ford's solution? Throw a cross brace reinforcement on that bad boy and call it a day. But there's just so much Ford about this build quality. Somehow the plastics are even harder than on the Laredo, and even the seats are a bit on the stiff side too, although I guess that's sort of nitpicky because really, they're fine. They're fine. But when there are this many points of potential failure on a given car, the negatives are crystallized all over so that you become more keenly aware of what you don't like. But even if you find things that you really like about the Ford Escape, it's inevitable almost that you're going to have this gnawing feeling in the back of your mind where you're waiting for the other shoe to drop and you're waiting for things to start going wrong. And as you're driving it, you're paying attention to the performance. You're making sure that it's not rickety and rattling all along the road because you're waiting for that moment. Okay, maybe I'm projecting a little bit. But I mean, for instance, when the coils fail on the Escape, you get a misfire, which causes the unburnt fuel to go down into the catalytic converter. Here, there are 3, 2 on the manifolds and 1 by the muffler, if I'm remembering correctly. So the unburnt fuel melts the upper catalytic converter, which gets blown downstream and clogs the lower one, leaving the car feeling asthmatic, so that even catalytic converter thieves probably wouldn't want to touch this car. But at least that's my understanding of how this 4x4 operates under its worst conditions. Of course, I feel weird even calling it a 4x4 because you can make the argument it really isn't one. At least not in the traditional sense, you know? Because basically, instead of locked 4-wheel drive, the Control Track 2 system delivers power to the rear whenever the front wheels slip. So it's essentially an all-wheel drive setup, but on demand rather than full-time. So basically front-wheel drive, I guess. Look, I'll try and explain the best I can without getting too deep into word salad, but to my understanding, the front wheels get all of the torque until one or both of the front wheels slip, in which case torque gets sent to the rear by means of a rotary blade coupling that engages a multi-plate clutch. It's this compartment with 3 blades and some silicone fluid that sort of work together so that when there's slippage in the front wheels, the blades get spinning to generate the heat necessary to expand the fluid to a point where the pressure is generated high enough to engage the multi-plate clutch. But it doesn't actually have to be this way, because when you turn the 4x4 knob to on, the responsibility of activating the multi-plate clutch moves from the rotary blade couplings to this tiny ball thing, the ramp thing that turns whenever the wheels slip. I feel like I'm descending down a ladder of poorly explained information because I'm totally not positive on how it works because I suck at explaining things, but it's all just a fancy way of saying that yes, each of the wheels gets something, but that's not necessarily the same thing as being a 4x4. I mean, you don't really have limited slip differentials here either, so you could potentially get stuck in certain precarious road conditions, which would seemingly disqualify this from ever truly being considered a 4x4. In comparison to actual examples, this 4x4 is about as useful as relationship advice from the Discord chat. Which brings us to the existential argument of the video. It's a crossover marketed as an SUV with nominal off-roading support, but actually more of a sedan style of performance. So what is this? And the answer is, I have absolutely no idea, but I'm not sure I care one way or the other. There is zero reason any of this should work, and yet I'm actually finding it pretty hard to complain about the Ford Escape, because it does exactly what it's supposed to do. No, it doesn't put the fun in function, and while I do appreciate a car that gets the job done first and foremost, I'd be a lot happier with a car that offered something in the way of dynamics. I'm not even looking for the kind of fun I used to have playing Grid 1, the gold standard of racing games, and I won't hear different. I'd take San Francisco Rush 2049 levels of fun, you know, where it's fun in the moment but maybe doesn't hold up long term. But I didn't get any of that from this. Just a surface level appreciation for Bobby's car and the fact that it doesn't do anything more or less than what you would expect. It's why it's even difficult to dock its lack of cosmetic appeal. Because who the hell expects a Ford Escape to be sexy or appealing or conspicuous in any way whatsoever? This is wallpaper that looks like bare drywall. This wouldn't even be exciting to overly spray-tanned jackasses who hear the word sunblock and think it's a kind of birth control. You're barely fitting skis or tents or any long adventure equipment in here, and if you could, then you're really only bringing one other person with you because these are not split bench seats in the back. You can seat 2 people or you can seat 5. What's your choice? But again, are you really looking for adventure when you're looking at a Ford Escape? Or are you just looking for something affordable with readily available parts, decent storage capacity, and a semi-decently durable engine? I mean, really, what was Ford trying to do here with this? Other than to make something sort of approximating a Jeep product, or even maybe one of their old Bronco type. But see, like, that sounds ridiculous because I don't even know for sure, because this entire project was the brainchild of the Ford-Mazda partnership, since Ford had controlling interest in Mazda at the time and co-developed this car alongside the Mazda Tribute, even as the 2 cars really only share some sheet metal composition and the Ford CD2 platform layout. But even that was based off of the Mazda GF platform, so this is as much a Mazda as it is a Ford anyway. The Escape was released in 2000 for the 2001 model year, at a time where SUVs were a lot closer to pickup trucks than the crossovers you would go on to see, considering how many of them used body-on-frame designs that mirrored pickups. Naturally, you could go with a Honda or pay the Toyota tax if you wanted a unibody option that drove more like a car. But what you ultimately get here is a boring SUV that gets decent gas mileage, with Bobby beating the factory 18 city 23 highway average to get around 20 to 22 miles per gallon and an all-time high close to 27. So it has that going for it, just add that to the plus column. Appearance-wise, this is a big old nothing burger, but I would be lying if I pretended that the performance didn't offer something better than I ever anticipated. And maybe that's just me being obnoxiously agreeable, but the amount of things that go wrong with a car like this left me expecting worse. But by the same token, even as I was kind of impressed by it, the amount of things that do go wrong with a car like this leave me in a space where I don't think I could ever recommend this to anybody but college students in rural areas looking for a reasonable first car. Because you will find these on the used market, and they will be decently affordable. But even within this context, even within being a broke college student, like I used to be, I could still imagine going with something like a Corolla or a Camry, but I understand that broke college students also have requirements that they need a bigger car for, whether it's moving things into a new apartment or dorm, or, they live in a place, like I said, with the rural areas where you get inclement weather situations where you need something a little more sturdy and more capable than just a typical sedan. So before I get too sidetracked, let's talk about the drive. And look, I have this hope for every car I do for this series to eventually be the one in which I find nothing redeeming whatsoever, or less than 20 or 15% redemption. I was expecting a weak sauce engine here and heavy-handed, nothing-happening performance, but something different happened. We are going to make this happen, and, it's... Yeah, I love that there's a column shifter on this. Being a very neutral sort of person, I am impressed by very simple things. Now, granted, while I am impressed very easily, I am not easily satisfied, although I have several college girlfriends who will say to the contrary. But we're not going to talk about that. Remember when women used to find you attractive, Nick? Fun times. God, I love my girlfriend. How is the aftermath of off-roading in this? Do you find that the car is maybe a bit more loose or maybe a bit more harsh,
You always wonder, did you, like you said, did you beat it up too much, or did something going to come loose after doing that? But I think there's a phrase, off-roading where, as slow as possible, as fast as necessary. So, when you're actually going off-road, you're not trying to beat up the vehicle, you're just trying to get from point A to point B.
Oh, there's a deer. I kind of wish I could spin the camera around, but alas. Hey, baby, where are you going?
Hi, Bambi.
I just want to feed you. I don't have anything to give her. I don't know. It's so great to be in Pennsylvania and see a living deer for once, and not a carcass on the side of the road.
Trying to pick Bobby. You might want to shift into 2 or low or some sort of lower gear for this descent.
You don't have to stop for that.
Oh, you don't?
No.
Oh, that's nice. All right, shifted. We are good to go. Thank you for the heads up.
Might be better in 1.
Oh, might be better in 1?
Yeah. And that'll do a little bit of engine braking.
Yeah.
Not much, but it's not going to stop you. But.
It's not bad, but it's doing what it's supposed to do. I mean, granted, that's literally what it's supposed to do, but
yeah, this doesn't have a low range, so that's it.
That's all you get.
Yeah.
I suppose I'm impressed by how not unimpressed I am, if that makes any sense. Like I told you, I came into this with an open mind. I didn't want to write it off before I got to drive it.
Yeah.
Want it to be fair. We're gonna see how this does, depending on what this Chevy does. just because it's unfair. You know, like I would be holding it to a standard that I wouldn't actually want it to fulfill if I were to ever get this car. Now, let me think of it from the standpoint of someone who might need this to go off-road for whatever reason. In which case, I would say you obviously have better options, namely Toyota options. There are even some Jeeps that would, you know, take this to task. But if cost is a consideration, then I don't think this is the worst option in the world. I'm kind of surprised in that I'm not more negative about this. I really was expecting this to barely be a step above functional. And I suppose all it really does is all it was ever really supposed to do, which is just get you around, and, you know, it doesn't have the greatest gas mileage in the world, but it's fine. Like, it's fine. It's a hard car to get passionate about, but it's a hard thing to let the negatives get to a point where you actually feel like they're enough to cause you to not like this. Word salad.
Oh, and there's a dead one.
Aw, that's sad.
Yeah.
I found myself taken aback by how much propulsive energy this car has. Merging is a breeze. Acceleration actually happens. And while I anticipated this chugging with effort, I found the Escape shockingly capable, because for all its intermediate size and bulk, it's fairly active. This is a unibody design rather than body-on-frame, and it lends itself to a more traditional car dynamic than the largesse of an SUV's handling. It's a lot more like what we would think of as a crossover, like I was talking about before. But, I mean, I guess Ford didn't want to use the term in marketing, it seems, because maybe people didn't really understand what a crossover was back in 2004, and they didn't want to confuse the market. Or maybe they simply wanted to ride the SUV wave. Either way, this far surpassed my expectations. It's not a great car by any stretch of the imagination, it's just not a disaster. It's not a bumpy, rattling ride, and I think the biggest surprise of all was just how capable this was on rocky terrain, with all the deep divots in the dirt, and potholes all over creation, and gravel lining every path like a dental dam. I would even go as far as to say it's good? Kind of? I don't know. I just kept finding myself caught off guard with how torquey it is and how easily it surmounts road conditions that are far less than ideal, even in great weather like we were having. And from a socio-cultural standpoint, I really don't know that this comes with much baggage beyond what you might bring to it. I could easily see this being driven by soccer moms, college kids, waiters with top buns, and weekend warriors right alongside those broke college students, and dude bros who give the barista a nickname to write on their Starbucks cup. Tall, skinny, cold foam latte, double pump of vanilla, extra shot of espresso for Surge. But in the spirit of honesty, I come back to one recurring thought that lives in my mind rent-free. The germ of an idea that forms the thesis of this entire video. I've wasted my life. Now, when I say I've wasted my life, I don't mean that I'm bogged down with regrets or longing to switch places with a multiversal version of myself that didn't go with a V6 Mustang. I've had amazing times in Red Betty. I suppose what I mean to say is, I had a choice, and I made the choice knowingly and freely. That choice was to go with a Ford product. Bobby and I have a lot in common. We both came to an interest in Fords as a result of our respective fathers, and I realized that in so many aspects of my life, sentimentality has driven me into choices I would have been better off not having made. So I forego pragmatism in favor of emotion because I'm a very emotionally driven person, and the end result is that I'm driving a Ford with a V6 that doesn't have a lot of ground clearance or room, and whose primary point of appeal is an Essex V6. And this is where I'll disagree with Brian in the sense that I prefer the Essex to the Duratec, but that's neither here nor there. I feel the twinge of roads less traveled, of paths not taken, because I could have had the same experiences, the same good experiences I've had with Betty the past 8 years, while not having to necessarily worry about all the same things I've been worrying about with Betty, which is the endless recursive cycle of not being enough car, of not really being able to take people anywhere because I don't really have any room, and always worrying about my suspension getting wrecked on these Pennsylvania roads, and always having to be concerned about just looking like kind of a jerk by dint of what it is I'm driving. But also, I don't really care what people perceive of Mustang drivers, because Lord knows I've made those cracks too, and contributed to the whole concept of Mustang drivers as a kind of self-absorbed make way for me kind of group. But ultimately, when I say I've wasted my life, I suppose I'm thinking about a version of me that had set aside the desire for a greater sense of fun and freedom in favor of the pragmatic need for greater ride height and, more room. And yes, more comfort, because while I wasn't exactly snug in this Escape, I found it was more comfortable than the car I have now. So, and that's probably a bar so low that Hermes Conrad couldn't get under it. But I'm still kind of holding things up against the Mustang, because I think as much as I love the car, in my race to the bottom, that one is still kind of winning. But like the Mustang, I feel like I could have really bonded with this car if this had been the type of car I had chosen. Now, the obvious point of discussion is that, well, for all you know, even more things would have gone wrong than with the Mustang, and you would have spent more money keeping it alive than you have already. Maybe the answer was never getting a Ford product. But I was younger and far dumber, and in a way I still am. And I know I need to find a way to go 5 minutes without saying something self-deprecating, but it's true. Even at 37, I'm still trying to understand the world I'm living in and to get better at existing inside of it. If I'm going to go with a Ford from 2004 that has a V6 anyway, then I should have just gone with the one that offered me a lot more than I have now, that has some of the things that Betty is lacking, that has caused resentment, whether fair or unfair. I don't have regrets. I really don't. I'm just coming to the realization that I could have had a very good life with a Ford Escape. I would have been happy. I was happy. I am happy with Betty. Even if I'm less happy now than I was, even if I am, sort of looking for the exit, my mind keeps turning back to a version of myself that chose differently. But then maybe that's what Race to the Bottom is about. Not just finding a car to hate, but coming to a fuller understanding of what I appreciate and why. Okay, so ultimately, in the Race to the Bottom, for me personally, I feel like if the worst thing I can say about the Ford Escape is that it's boring, then to me, that's not really that bad of a car. That's not worth hating. So I'm going to put the Jeep Grand Cherokee Laredo still at the bottom, still at the lead in the Race to the Bottom, and the Ford Escape is up top. Eventually, I hope to fill this with a top 5, this area over here, or maybe I'll put it over here. Who knows? But thank you for joining me on this, and if you think you have a car that can win the Race to the Bottom, send me an email at regularcarstheroman@gmail.com. I don't know how to do the little spreading out thing, but it's just going to be here, magically appear. regularcarstheroman@gmail.com if you want your car featured on here, and if you don't mind making the drive out to southeastern Pennsylvania to come say hi, and hopefully you can find something, or you have something that I might actually not like.
My 4Runner is all dusty and dirty now. It lost some of its resale value.
Aww. All right, have a great rest of your week, everyone.
Ham. Oh, we gotta go to the grocery store, get a lot of ham. I want the stuff that's in the can. That way we have food for when the opposing party takes power.
Ford Escape, Ford Escape. Nothing more that I can drive makes me wanna shrug inside. Ford Escape, Ford Escape. Nothing more that I can drive makes me wanna shrug inside. I try to write a bad review I can post, but I know it can't go up if I'm wrong.